Everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. In the last few weeks we've been playing around a lot with silver plating lures, both tiny lures and these kind of average size lures. But since my intention for this channel is really to help people get into the hobby of lure making, let's get back to basics. Let's make a lure out of some balsa wood. All right, so here's our design. I want it to be kind of a panfish. It's gonna have a dive bib, so it's gonna be a crankbait. And I am gonna put some kind of little fiber tail that I'll probably make out of the bristles from a brush. So the length, 2 3/4 inches, which is approximately 70 millimeters. The height is 1 1/8, which is approximately 28.5 millimeters. And the thickness is gonna end up right at 5/8 of an inch, which is about 16 millimeters. And I'm going to start out with a block of balsa that's about 3/4 of an inch in thickness, right at 1 3/8 height, and it's plenty long enough. So I'm going to go ahead, transfer that drawing onto this, and we'll start cutting. I'm not a huge fan of making lures from balsa. I know a lot of people really love it, but I find it a little fiddly. It's easy to damage it, and it's a little tough to make it sink since it's so light. But it is easy to cut and easy to shape, and it's easy to find in the stores. So it's got its benefits. So as I was saying, one of the weaknesses of balsa is that it's weak. So using screw and eyes really isn't very viable because they'll pull out pretty easily or they'll rupture the wood. While lots of lure makers use screw and eyes on balsa, I prefer to use a continuous wire harness that forms all the eyes and interconnects them and gets glued into the body. And we'll have our ballast weight somewhere above our wire, about 1/3 of the way back from the tip. And take notice that I put the widest part of the lure body aligned with the highest part or the deepest part of the body. I find that works really well for crankbaits and creates a more stable lure. And I almost forgot, the bib should be on about a 30-degree angle from the horizontal. And since the top of my vise is perfectly level, we're going to align our little gauge with our line, and we've got right at 30 degrees. Set my calipers to half the thickness of the wood, and I'm just scoring in a center line. And you can do this with just a ruler. And I'll just draw it in with pencil. I'll do the same to the other side. All right, after roughing in some contour lines from front to back, I like to put in some guide lines on the side. And let me show you how I establish those. I like to look at the cross section, and I look where down the side of the lure does it become sort of the outside edge of the lure. So it's somewhere around here, which is about 1/3 of the way down the lure, maybe a little less. So that's where I would establish my contour line for the top part. And then I would do the same thing for the bottom. And that gives me an idea more or less where those lines should be. So while I still have nice square sides, put the lure in the vise so I can go ahead and start cutting that groove. That's going to be the groove we put our wire harness in. And it's going to be deepest right where it aligns with the belly hook. And that should do it for now. If I need to widen it or deepen it later, it'll be easier. And then cutting these contours front to back. I don't really try to cut perfectly along the line. I just want to get close, get most of that. Well, carving is a little more fun to watch than it is to actually do, at least for me. And in this case, I'm just carving off the corners. I'm trying to get to a shape that's close enough to what I want at the end that I can get the rest with just some coarse sandpaper, working my way to finer and finer sandpaper. This way, I don't have to bore both of us to death with this tedious process. And with the rough carving done, and I do mean rough, I can now refine the shape with some sandpaper, which is really easy to do with balsa. In fact, you got to be a little bit careful not to take too much material off. And I'll start off with 60 grit, just to get going pretty quickly here. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. That is about as symmetric as I can get any lure, especially a balsa lure, because it's so easy to take too much off one side or the other. But I've got all the slots cut in. I've got the slot for the tail fin. I've got the little slot for the little fin I'm going to put on top. And before I get too far along on the sanding, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of eye sockets in it. I'll use a drill bit for that. This way I can locate where I'm going to do a little bit of carving that I'm going to do. And I always use a Forstner bit to create the socket, but I run it in reverse when I'm dealing with balsa so it doesn't splinter out. Here are the carving details. Let's see how well they come out. Well, that's a start. I'm going to go ahead and get it sanded back a little bit, and I'll get back to you when it's looking a little more complete. With the carving done, I'm ready to add a little weight to the body. Now, I want the weight to be as low as possible in the body, but because the wire is going to be taking up most of the bottom part, I'm going to have to put it in above the wire. So before we get into those details, let's find out how much weight I actually need. So let's just weigh the bare body of the lure. It's 3.51 grams. And because I know the density of the balsa that I used, I had already solved for it. It's 0.189 grams per cubic centimeters. I can just take 3.51 and divide it by the density, 0.189, and I get 18.57 grams. So 18.52 grams would be the amount of weight that the lure would have to weigh with all the hardware and everything for it to just to suspend. For it to weigh 18 grams, I would have to fill it with lead. There's just no way I can get it heavy enough. And that's another of the sort of drawbacks with balsa lures. Now, there are ways to get enough lead in there to get it to sink, but it's not easy. And you're much better off using a heavier wood if you're going to make a sinking or suspending lure. But we can get it to float a little less buoyantly, right? A little less of a rapid rise through the water column. But I think we're gonna have to just shoot for about 3/4 of that suspending weight, which would be right at 14 grams. So let's see if we can add enough weight for it to be 14 grams. So we have the body weight, the 2 hooks I plan to use, the dive bib, and a couple of these little nail weights, which they are lead. And that gets us to almost 12. And now I gotta be very careful drilling these holes that I don't crack anything or go too deep. All right, I've drilled 2 holes really close to each other, and I'm just gonna shove these things down. Now they gotta go deep enough to get out of the way of the wire. So we'll shove them down with a screwdriver here. And looks like we're gonna be fine. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and move on to make the harness. And I'm gonna use some stainless steel leader wire. It's a 131-pound test, 0.024 inch of diameter. And the first thing I wanna do is just add a twist eye to the end. All right, simple little twist eye. And that twist eye will fit right there, just like that. By making that bend the depth of what the bib is gonna go into the face, I can then sink that in there deep enough so it won't interfere with the bib. And I've already got it bent back out where I'm going to form the belly hook eye. Then I can just grasp it there, and just using these little conical pliers, I can just wrap that tail end around the pliers, forming that little eye. And then I just need to straighten out the leg so it continues down the body to the tail. All right, with the wire placed in the body where it goes, I can mark the tail eye with a nice bend, and then we'll make another twist eye here. And then I'm just gonna force it into a little bit of an arc so it follows the contour of the body a little bit. All right, that has it. It's just a matter of gluing it all in. And I'm gonna do that with some UV resin. And you could do this with some 2-part fast setting epoxy, but this is really quick and pretty doggone strong. About 10 seconds with the light on it, and it hardened. And I'll glue the tail in next. And that's got the wire harness installed. I just got to fill in the slot. And after I set this resin, we'll weigh it again and see if the resin has helped us a little bit. And I know I'm not going to have the weight I want, but I'm hoping that the paint and all the finish work is going to give us a lot more weight. And the bib, and we're at 12.24. That's almost a gram more than we started with, so that's awesome. So I've got one more thing to add to it before I seal it, and that's the little fin I'm going to put on top. I still got to carve it out, but I'll do that with the Dremel tool. I've got the fin in and sanded down so it doesn't have really sharp edges. And I've got the bottom all sealed up and sanded back. It's just a matter of getting it sealed. And I'm just going to use a really thin coat of UV resin, and then we can paint. The idea is just to seal the grain, and I'll probably have to give it a light sanding after this, but we should be ready to paint after this sets. And it should only take, maybe 20 minutes. Thin coats take a little extra time. I'm trying not to fill in my carving at all. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the chamber. And I'll go ahead and turn the lights on. All right, so while we wait to be able to paint, I wanna go ahead and design the little tail fluke for it. And I saved the drawing from the tape. Let's see if we can't just come up with just a simple little shape that will work for it. And I think that's going to work right there. I just wanted to make sure I could actually come up with a nice scale for a tail. And we're going to make our tail out of this bristle brush. And this is one of those little throwaway bristle brushes from Harbor Freight. And I'll just pull it apart. And this is a little technique I came up with probably 4 or 5 years ago that will work with just about any brush. As long as the bristles are held together with glue, you'll be able to use whatever brush you have. So we take it out, take our bristles out. And then I really don't need a whole lot of this stuff. So I'm going to pull off probably, I'm going to say about 25% of the bristles and then separate them out. So now what I do is I take a pair of pliers that's got some nice flat jaws on it, and I just want to grab the glue ball. And you just want to give it a good hard squeeze. And you see how the bristles just sort of fan out like so. And you want to make sure it's fanned out enough to cover the shape of the tail. Now take a piece of masking tape that can fold over itself and cover the tail that I just made. And I'll place the spread out bristles right onto the sticky side of the tape. Make sure they're set down in there. And then I'll fold it over without messing with the bristles. And if you stick it down good and firmly, you'll be able to see the outline of the bristles. Camera might not pick it up, but you can certainly see it with your eyes. And you know what? I think I screwed up and didn't cover enough of the bristles to be able to make the shape for this tail. So I'm going to put a little more tape on here. That should do it. Now I've got enough tape to draw on. And now with the tail placed the way it's going to be on the lure, with a little ball of glue inserted in the tail, I'm going to go ahead and draw the tail I want on this thing. And don't sweat this part too much. This is just sort of a rough shape for me to cut the bristles. And then when it's installed on the lure, I'll be able to refine it a little more. So we just cut the shape. All right, I've got the lure ready to be painted. Let me show you what I did. So hopefully you can see how the lure is now blotchy and white, but also has a little bit of a sheen on the outside. So what I did to get to this point is that I took it out of the UV chamber after that UV resin was set and found that it was still really fuzzy. Balsa is just like that, has a very fuzzy, kind of open pore grain to it. So I sanded those fuzzes off, and it still was a little too textured for my taste. So I sprayed it with some white primer, just spray primer, and that stuff is thick enough that it acts like a microfiller. And then I just sanded that back really lightly and gave it like 3 coats of my polyacrylic, and this is, I don't know if you can read that anymore, but it's Minwax polyacrylic, it's gloss, and it's cut 15% by volume with just a little water. So now we're ready to paint. I'm going to start with a base coat of silver. And I'm going to start off with Wicked Paints, Wicked Aluminum. Takes a lot to get that little ball going in there. And I'll give that 3 or 4 really light coats. All right, that's after about 3 coats. I'm doing a bluegill pattern, and I want to start off with some transparent colors as undercoats for the scales. First with some blue, then some transparent violet. Transparent paints on silver makes a nice effect. And now I put a little bit of bright transparent green up high on the body of the lure, even on the head a bit. With the lure wrapped in a fine scale cloth, I go ahead and come in with some transparent charcoal black, trying to keep it dense up high and then sort of fading below, and trying to avoid the gill plates. All right, I'm going to put a real small touch of transparent fuchsia right down at the very bottom of the gill. Now I want to give it a hint of vertical bars with a dark green. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the top with the same dark green. And now I'm going to give the little fin just a shot of silver through this really fine comb that I've cut on a bias. All right, now I've got this little piece of plastic with a little cutout for the little ear gill. And I'm going to use this little sort of an orangey yellow. It's called Middle Yellow. It's from TimberTech. All right, the last thing I want to do is just sort of make the dark green a little more solid on top. And then for the belly, I want to put on some transparent ghost tint orange. Unfortunately, I put a little nick in the paint on this side when I was messing around with one of the combs. So now I just need to let all these layers of paint set, and I'm going to go ahead and allow nature to help me out. Since it's a really sunny day, I'm going to take it outside, hang it somewhere in the full sunshine. I'm going to have lunch, and when I'm done with lunch, I'll go ahead and finish this thing up. And maybe by the afternoon, we can actually take it, test it in the water. And with the paint dry, we can get some eyes on the lure. The eyes just really bring it to life. And now we can install the dive bib. And I'm using some UV resin, setting it through the bib with the light. And now we can install the tail using the same glue as before and the UV light. Pull off the tape and we reveal a pretty nice shape of a tail. Pretty happy with that. Now we're ready for a nice clear coat. And I'll go ahead and let it rotate in there for a little while before I turn the lights on. I look like the penguin. And then hopefully we'll still have some daylight when this thing is set, and we'll go down to the dock and tune it and see if we can get some underwater shots. There it is. Still haven't gotten it wet. Let's put it on the rod. Just looking at the tie-on eye, I can tell it's going to need a little tuning. So let's give it a shot. Yeah, it's pulling hard to the left, it looks like. So it's just a matter of bending this slightly in the other direction. Always do very little at one time. Still moving a little bit to the left. Let's give it a little more. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's hard to see it, I'm sure, because it wants to dive. All right, I gave it one last tweak. I think that has it right there. Yeah, nice action, really nice action on this thing. Oh, I really like the action on this. This is gonna be a really nice lure. Let's get out and test it underwater. I'm pretty happy with it. It is actually a really pretty lure, and it casts a good long way, and on a good cast it'll dive about 6 or 7 feet, so it's a good deep diver. I'll leave you guys with a short little slideshow of this, and if you want to see another really nice build, click on the video that you see on the screen right now. And if you haven't subscribed, come on, join the team, subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what you think about building with balsa and whether you like it or you're not much for it like me.